Hello and welcome to today's edition of Mexico News Network's Breaking News Business. I'm your host, Elliot Bullman. Let's start with today's show. So far, in 2017, 4 companies have listed in Mexico, raising a combined $2.1 billion in initial public offerings. In addition, Sigma Alimentos, a unit of industrial conglomerate Grupo Alfa, and Traxion, a transportation company controlled by private equity funds Nexus and Discovery Americas, this week confirmed their IPOs. In October, Banco Mifel is expected to launch its own IPO, as is the transportation subsidiary of Mexican miner Grupo México. If all the planned IPOs take place, Mexico could break its 2012 record amount raised, which according to consultancy firm Dialogic stood at $6.8 billion, mostly driven by the $4 billion listing in 2012 of Spanish bank Santander. Juan Manuel Olivo, head of promotion and issuers for the Mexican Stock Exchange, said the IPO spike this year is primarily due to stable economic conditions, as well as new business opportunities that require capital and attractive valuations. He said the Mexican Stock Exchange has also stepped up efforts to better inform companies of their financing options, which also include issuing debt and new real estate investment trusts known locally as Fibras. In other news, total funds that are alleged to have been stolen by 22 former Mexican governments add up to $14.5 billion, according to a blacklist compiled by Mexican newspaper El Universal. That money represents 29 times the balance of the Federal Disaster Relief Fund, which would have been more than sufficient to rebuild infrastructure damaged or destroyed during the 2 catastrophic earthquakes that took place on September the 7th and September the 19th in central Mexico. The missing funds, allegedly stolen by just a third of those ex-governors, represent nearly half the total of the funds needed. Javier Duarte Ochoa, who governed Veracruz between 2010 and 2016, allegedly stole 35 billion pesos during that period. And one Duarte is followed by another. Cesar Duarte Jaques, governor of Chihuahua from 2010 to 2016, has been accused of stealing 80 billion pesos. Nayarit's Roberto Sandoval Castañeda, whose term as governor ended last week, is facing a legal complaint for illicit enrichment and mismanagement of at least 1.5 billion pesos. Rodrigo Medina de la Cruz governed Nuevo León from 2009 to 2015, and he's been accused of embezzlement and pecuniary damage to the state coffers to the tune of 3.6 billion pesos. Meanwhile, the alleged corruption of former Quintana Roo governor Roberto Borge Angulo, currently on a hunger strike in a Panamanian prison awaiting extradition to Mexico, is said to have cost the state treasury 1.9 billion pesos during his term between 2011 and 2016. And in Colima, the state auditor's office has said that former governor Mario Anguiano Moreno diverted over 2.1 billion pesos of state funds during the 6 years of his administration between 2009 and 2015. All 7 governors took office under the banner of the current governing Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI. Moving on. On Tuesday, the 3rd round of negotiations of the NAFTA agreement saw 2 proposals that put the Mexican private sector on red alert. On the one hand, Canada sought a renegotiation on labor and wage standards, while on the other hand, the United States sought to limit Mexican agricultural exports by seasonality. It's the first aggression received by Mexico's agri-food sector in the talks, and one of the biggest threats to Mexico in the negotiations, according to Bosco de la Vega, president of the National Agricultural Council. The proposal from the U.S. delegation stems from pressures of Florida strawberry growers and Georgia blueberries, who demand the access of Mexican products to that market be restricted to certain seasons so that they don't coincide with their crop harvests. De la Vega vehemently opposed the move, saying that Mexico is opposed to seasonal control of its exports. During the first 4 days of the 3rd round of talks, the leading trade union leaders in the United States and Canada were close to the negotiators in their countries, pushing the idea of raising labor standards, including wages. Interviewed on this issue, Canada's largest trade union leader, Jerry Dias, insisted that the jobs that have been lost in the Canadian industry are due to low wages in Mexico. The talks continue in Washington next month. And finally, let's turn to the markets. The Mexican peso decreased 0.0126 or 0.07% to 18.22 from 18.23 in the previous trading session. IPC Mexico decreased 190 points or 0.38% to 50,169 from 50,368 in the previous trading session. This was all for today. Thank you for staying with us. I'm your host, Elliot Bullman. Remember to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. And log on to MexicoNewsNetwork.com for more information on Mexico and the world. Until next time.